Welcome in, everyone. We're doing something a little bit different today, a deep dive into The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And don't worry, this isn't about what stocks to pick. It's about how our brains work when it comes to money.
It's really interesting. We often treat money like a math problem with right and wrong answers. Yeah. But Housel argues it's really our experiences and emotions that drive a lot of our choices.
And he starts the book with this story about a tech millionaire, brilliant guy, built this whole business, but was terrible with his own personal finances. Like, imagine someone who can, rebuild a car engine, but can't boil water.
Exactly. It's like, what's going on there? And Housel says it's because we all develop these deep-seated beliefs about money based on our experiences. Like, think about someone who lived through the massive inflation back in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to look at bonds completely differently than someone who, say, grew up in the 90s and 2000s.
Right. Totally different experiences. It's like, my grandfather, he still has a stockpile of canned goods from a sale back in '82 because he lived through that recession, and it totally shaped how he thinks about scarcity, even now.
And that's what I mean about everyone having these, like, grandpa's soup cans in their minds about money. You can't separate someone's decisions from their background, even if those decisions seem kind of irrational from the outside.
So we shouldn't judge someone's financial choices without understanding their history with money.
Exactly. Because everyone's coming to the table with a different financial story. And when you realize that, it helps you understand your own maybe unconscious biases, makes you think, okay, am I making decisions based on what I actually value or just on some script I'm carrying around from my past?
So true. And speaking of success stories, Housel talks about Bill Gates, but not in the way you might expect.
Right. He focuses on how Gates just happened to go to one of the very few high schoolers back then that had access to computers. He was in the right place at the right time, which is a huge factor.
So it wasn't all just genius and hard work?
Of course, those played a part. But Housel calls that kind of lucky break a tail event.
Oh, what event?
A tail event. Like, imagine flipping a coin and getting heads 1,000 times in a row. It's technically possible, but it totally warps your sense of how likely flipping heads actually is.
Okay, I get it.
So copying the strategies of crazy successful people is kind of like thinking you'll win the lottery just because someone else did. We fall for this survivorship bias, only seeing the winners, not all the people who had similar plans but different outcomes.
So how do we learn from success stories without falling into that trap?
I think it's about understanding that luck plays a role and focusing on what you can control, like building good financial habits that work in any market, not just when the stars perfectly align.
Makes sense. Now, speaking of doing things consistently over time, Housel shares this wild fact. Warren Buffett made most of his wealth after turning 50.
Right. It's the magic of compounding. It's not just that he's a good investor, it's that he's been doing it for so long. Those small gains over decades add up to something huge.
So patience isn't just a virtue, it's like a money-making strategy.
You got it. He compares Buffett to this hedge fund guy, Jim Simons, who has better average returns, but Buffett has decades on him, which makes all the difference.
Huh. It's like we're always looking for that quick win, but the real magic happens when you stick with something, even if it's slow and steady.
That's the power of playing the long game. Small, consistent actions over time lead to incredible results. And that goes for everything, not just money, but relationships, your career, learning a new skill.
So true. Start early, stay consistent, and let time do the work.
Now that's something worth investing in.
You know, one thing I really like about Housel's approach is he's all about finding what works for you, even if it means going against, like, the typical financial advice.
Totally. He even says in the book he prioritizes owning his home outright and investing in index funds, even though he knows those choices might not be the absolute highest returns, mathematically speaking.
Right. Like, it reminds me of that saying, peace of mind is worth more than money. Sometimes just knowing you're comfortable with your strategy, even if it's not optimal on paper, is huge.
He actually calls it the sleep well at night factor, which I love. It's recognizing that we all have different values, different things that motivate us. What makes one person feel secure might stress someone else out, and that's okay.
Yeah, makes sense. So it's not always about squeezing every last percentage point of return. It's about aligning your choices with what matters most to you.
Exactly. It's your money, your life. You get to decide. Find what feels right for you, and don't be afraid to go against the grain. You know, it means you're living according to your own values.
I like that. Now, this next part really got me thinking. Housel says that the stories we tell ourselves about money, they can actually shape the entire economy. Like, think about back in 2008 with the whole housing market crash.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about subprime mortgages or whatever. It was a change in the story, right?
Absolutely. Housel talks about how before the crash, there was this belief housing prices always go up. It was like an unquestioned truth. But once that belief cracked, even a little, the whole thing started to unravel.
Wow. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. People panicked because the story they believed about the market suddenly changed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just shows how powerful our narratives about money really are. They can impact not just our own personal decisions, but the entire economic landscape.
It's kind of unsettling when you really think about it, how much our perception of money can impact its actual value.
And that's why it's so important to be aware of those narratives, right?
Yeah.
The stories we're being told, but also the stories we tell ourselves, because those stories have real-world consequences.
100%. Okay, this might seem like a total left turn, but Housel tells this story about a patient back in the 1930s who died after some kind, I think it was dental surgery. And what's crazy is the patient's wife sued the dentist not because the surgery was botched, but because her husband never actually consented to it.
It sounds crazy now, but back then, doctors, really anyone in medicine, they had this much more paternalistic approach. They made decisions for patients, not with them.
That's wild. It's like if you took your car to the mechanic and they just decided what to fix without even telling you.
Right. But over time, there was this big shift, thankfully, in medicine, realizing that patients have different values, different priorities, different levels of risk they're comfortable with.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Housel saying we need that same kind of shift in how we think about money, right?
Exactly. Just like there's no one right way to approach healthcare, there's no one right way to manage your finances. It's about finding what works for your situation, your goals, your risk tolerance.
So blindly following someone else's financial advice, even if they have good intentions, is kind of like letting a doctor operate without knowing what they're doing or why.
100%.
Yeah.
It should be a conversation. It's your financial well-being, so you have to be an active participant in that. Ask questions, do your own research, advocate for yourself.
I love that. Taking ownership of your financial journey, just like you would your health. Being informed, engaged, empowered to make choices that align with what you want.
Absolutely. It's your money, your future, own it.
Now let's talk about something we all think about, wealth. I love how Housel kind of flips the script on what it actually means to be wealthy. He says, wealth is what you don't see.
Such a good point. We're so used to equating wealth with those outward displays, right? Expensive cars, fancy vacations, designer, everything. But Housel challenges us to look beyond those surface level things.
Yeah, it's like don't judge a book by its cover, but for your bank account. Someone could be driving a brand new car but drowning in debt, and someone else is taking the bus but has $1 million investment portfolio. You never know.
And that's the difference between being rich and being wealthy, right? Rich is a high income, but wealthy, that's a high net worth. And you don't build net worth by spending everything you earn trying to impress people.
So true. So true wealth is less about keeping up with the Joneses and more about having options, freedom, financial security.
Having those choices in your life. It's about making decisions that give you peace of mind. The ability to pursue what you're passionate about without being tied to a paycheck if you don't want to be.
It's funny, we often think about saving as this, like, sacrifice. But the way Housel talks about it, it actually sounds empowering.
Because it is. Saving isn't about denying yourself things you enjoy. It's about that delayed gratification. Making choices today that give you more options in the future, more freedom.
It's like you're investing in your future self instead of always splurging on your present self.
Exactly. And Housel also points out, past a certain income level, so much of spending is driven by ego, by comparing ourselves to others. It's like we buy things to impress other people or because we think we should have them.
Totally. It's like when you buy something you don't even really need just because it was a good deal, you know? It's not about the thing. It's that little rush you get, like, oh, I'm so smart, I got a bargain.
Exactly. So learning to be content with what you have, not getting caught in that comparison trap, that's huge. It's not about deprivation, it's about freedom from those external pressures.
So how do we do that? How do we break free from that comparison cycle? How do we make choices that actually serve our future selves, not just our immediate desires? So we've been talking about making choices that serve our future selves, and Housel keeps coming back to this idea of playing the long game when it comes to building wealth.
He loves that Warren Buffett example you mentioned earlier, where how most of his wealth was accumulated after he turned 50. It's kind of the opposite of how we're taught to think about success, right? Like, make it big early.
It's like he just kept getting better with age. Okay, bad analogy, but it really shows you how much we underestimate the power of time when it comes to money.
Yeah, it's that compounding magic at work.
Yeah.
You don't need massive returns every year. It's that consistency over decades That's what creates the snowball effect.
So it's less about hitting it big quickly and more about staying in the game for the long haul.
Exactly. And not just staying in the game, but finding a strategy that you can actually stick with.
Yeah.
Even when things inevitably get a little bumpy, because they will. That's just how markets work.
Speaking of bumpy rides, Housel also seems to push back on this idea that you always need to chase the absolute highest possible returns.
Because those high returns usually come with equally high risk, right? You could win big one year, but then that kind of volatility can wipe you out just as fast the next. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride, exhilarating, but not always a smooth one.
So are you saying we should all just play it safe and avoid risk altogether?
Not at all. It's about finding that balance, the sweet spot between risk and reward that allows you to sleep well at night, knowing you've got a plan that can weather the ups and downs.
That's a good way to put it. When you think about it, financial security, it's not just about how much money you have, it's how much peace of mind it gives you.
Exactly. And that peace of mind, it comes from knowing yourself, what you're comfortable with. Some people can handle more risk than others, and that's okay. It's about finding what aligns with your own risk tolerance.
This is making me think about how much our emotions play into our financial decisions. Like, remember back in 2020 when the market tanked because of, everything happening? I know people who panicked, sold everything, and lost a ton of money.
Yeah, it's a classic example of fear taking over. Housel talks about how fear and greed, those are the two biggest drivers of bad financial decisions. When we're afraid, we don't always think clearly,
It's like that saying, don't make a permanent decision based on a temporary emotion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the same goes for greed, right? When we're feeling greedy, we might take on way more risk than we can actually handle, hoping for that quick win. But it can backfire pretty badly.
So how do we avoid making those emotionally driven decisions, especially with money? I mean, it's easy to say, just be rational. But when you're actually watching your portfolio shrink, that's a lot harder to do in the moment.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a skill. Like anything else, it takes practice. Housel's big on having a plan and sticking to it, even when your emotions are telling you to do something drastic.
Yeah.
And also just remembering that market downturns, they're normal. They're part of the cycle.
It's about riding out the waves, not letting them totally knock you over.
Exactly. Like surfing, right? You're not always going to catch the wave perfectly, and sometimes you're going to wipe out. But you get back up on the board, you learn, and you trust that you've got the skills to navigate what comes next.
One of the biggest takeaways for me from this whole conversation and from Housel's book is that there isn't one right way to manage your money. It's about finding what actually works for you, for your life, even if it goes against what you might hear elsewhere.
He's all about personalizing your approach to finances. Just like how different diets and exercise plans work for different people, there are different money management strategies that click with different values and goals.
It goes back to what you said before about finding what helps you sleep well at night, which, at the end of the day, that's really important.
100%. Because money, it really is just a tool. It's a means to an end. Yeah. So understanding your own relationship with money, what you value, what your goals are, that's how you start making choices that actually align with the life you want to live.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I know I've learned a lot, and I have a feeling our listeners are going to want to keep digging into this too.
I agree. Housel's book is so packed with insights, it's impossible to cover it all. But hopefully this deep dive will give everyone a starting point.
Definitely. And for anyone listening, if you want to continue the conversation, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you? What are you still thinking about?
Hit us up on social media, send us an email, let's keep the conversation going.
And with that, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Until next time.
See you next time.